good to see all of you this afternoon. I hope that you enjoy our program today. It promises to be very interesting. We have refreshments on the back that you're welcome to when we finish with the program. And feel free to ask questions and visit after the program is over. We will have a business meeting after the program, so members, if you'll stay until our guests are taken care of, then we'll have our business meeting. Again, welcome. I'm glad to see you all coming out, and we appreciate your support. Annabeth.
Good afternoon. I'm so glad you could join us. We're all here because we're interested in the history of our ancestors, and if you haven't been up to the museum upstairs, you're missing a treat. One of the items that I'm especially fascinated by is a winding cloth made by my ancestor in the mid-1800s. And I was so fascinated, I wanted to find out more about this, but any mortician, I don't know that many morticians, but any that I asked about the history, they're like, I don't know. But someone, I'm not from this area, but someone said, you need to call Dan Lipford. And so I did, and not only is his heart for serving his community, which he has done for almost 40 years, he has a great fascination for and knowledge of the burial practices and customs that our ancestors so lovingly provided in the olden days. And I'm so excited that he was able to come speak with us today. And please give a warm welcome for Mr. Dan Lipford.
Hello there. My name is Dan Lipford, and thank y'all for having me here today. My voice is a little raspy. I'm not sick. I did a little yelling last night in Knoxville, Tennessee. So,
did you get down to the river?
We won't talk about that. I was involved. I want to talk to you a little bit about the early customs of funeral service, and especially the embalming part. In the early colonial settlements, they basically just took you when you passed away and buried you because of the smells and the potential for disease and everything. So that was kind of what they did in that time. There wasn't any real hoopla or anything with funeral service. And then in the Old West, the term undertakers came around. A lot of times if they were out in the middle of the desert, they would just bury the person, make sure they were covered and protected. And then when the small towns came around, they started building the caskets or the coffins. And for a fee, I guess they would maybe take your horse or whatever, they would build a coffin and place you into the grave there, the town that they're in. A lot of times they were they were cabinet makers. And then as Annabeth mentioned, the winding cloth, that was also something that they would do not only just for with the casket. A lot of times they just used them without because that's all they had, and clothing was expensive to get back then. During the Civil War, around 1861 there, everything was changed. All the fallen soldiers and the battles of the big battles, they started. Dr. Thomas Holmes was known as the father of modern day embalming. He, along with Henry Cattrall, started the arterial embalming process. And they used mercury and zinc compounds, and he continued the earlier work from Jean Guenel of Paris. He was commissioned by Abraham Lincoln for the treatment of all the fallen soldiers. He claimed to have embalmed around 4,800 people himself. He charged $100, which was a pretty good sum back then, to embalm the bodies. They were trying to get the soldiers home because they, had to go by train or whatever, and if they couldn't get them home, then they had to be buried in the away lands there. So once the embalming process started, I've got some couple of slides there of the embalming process happening. They got really good with it, and then they started using arsenic for embalming fluid. Arsenic is the best embalming fluid in the world, but we can't use it anymore, obviously. But they have what they call a cooling board over here, and a lot of times the ladies would go to the person's home for a lady and dress them, prepare them, and purge the body, prepare them for burial. And the guys normally would do the guys. They would dress them and then do the burial. And it was just a process of just basically burial without any services or what have you. And then it became a normal thing to embalm people at that point. They would actually, the funeral home people would come to your home or wherever you passed away, pick you up, to take you back to the funeral parlor and embalm you, and then take you back home. It's called a wake at that point. Funeral directors were then involved with ambulance service and everything of that nature. So it's came a long way to what it is today. It's totally different than when they just take you and place you in the grave. So we've got some display. This was actually found in an old barn. It's a 1920s glass case for a casket for a baby or an infant. And it came to the Shounds Depot down here. So that was interesting. I've got the case up there for it, where it came. As Annabeth said, I've always had an interest or a fascination with the older stuff. So, and then the cooling board, the old antique caskets, have a lot of those at the funeral home if anybody wants to come by. I've got some information here if anybody wants to read it or has any questions about the embalming process. So, does anybody have any questions?
Well, what is the embalming process? I'm vaguely aware of what happens.
Okay. It's called arterial embalming, and you basically take a formaldehyde and replace the blood with that fluid. You go through the arterial system and the blood that comes out through the venous system. So formaldehyde is a gas in a liquid form, and when you put it in water it starts diffusing, and so it replaces all the fluids and makes your body more permeable, and it preserves you basically.
What they do in the old days though, I mean.
Well, like with the Civil War.
They drain the blood and the ability to put a tube in the.
Yeah, it's kind of like bloodletting.
Me in the old one.
This is actually, kind of got broke, but this is actually an embalming bottle. And you get 2 feet of pressure, or 2 pounds of pressure for every 3 feet that you have this up in the air. So you put your fluid in, when you turn it upside down, it comes out here, and this is an air hole here, and this was used to hold it up with whatever they had to use. So it's the same process we have today, but we have electrical stuff to use.
Wow. What do they use for tubing? I mean, is that right there? Is that where it literally goes into
Right
the
here.
vein?
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
You have it looks like, it's called a cannula. It looks like a long metal tube, but you have to raise up the carotid artery and the jugular vein, and you place that little cannula in there, and it pushes through they had to get these quite high back in the day to get enough pressure to do it.
Okay, thank you.
So you're welcome. Anybody else have any questions?
Why was arsenic a good embalming fluid?
Because of the compounds in it, people could last literally 50, 60, 70 years with that embalming fluid. But at the same time, if Mr. Smith killed his wife with arsenic poisoning, and they got to the undertaker and she was embalmed, they couldn't find it. You know, it looked like she was just embalmed. So therefore, we had to quit using it. But it is a really good embalming chemical. They let us use it a couple of times in school, and it's amazing.
I saw a calendar up there that I think it was from the Donnelly Hill.
Uh-huh. Yeah, Miss Evelyn Hill donated that to us there. And the phone number was 1620, so that's been a spell, 1948. But, you know, nowadays you've got restorative arts and different things that we do. Like, you can basically put a person back together if you have enough time.
What is the history of the Hill Donnelly Funeral Home? I know it was at Shounds. Was it Donnelly or was it Hill?
It was actually Hill. Donnelly was in town up above where my place is now. And then they combined, I think the Donnellys and the Hills, I don't know if they married into the families and combined into one funeral home, which eventually became Lewis Gentry. And then after Mr. Gentry, it was Charles Hux and Bob Percy. So it's all just kind of went, kind of stays in a generations there, families.
What year was it started?
The Donnelly or the Hill?
Yeah, the Donnelly.
The Donnelly was in 1890 or so. I've got actually their records. I thought they were destroyed, but if anybody has any family members that from the Donnelly or the Hill legacy, you're welcome to come and look at those. They're pretty amazing. There's telegrams and everything in there that I never saw before, or anything like that. And it's really cool. Dave?
Dan, I've heard some people talk about where they lived out in the country, instead of getting them embalmed, that they, people in the community, they would come uptown, get a coffin, take it to the home, and like it's a man, the men dressed whoever it was, and they didn't even embalm them.
Right.
I know my dad was talking about, I think it's when Uncle Joe Buchanan died, he said they had a room, they put the coffin with Joe in it close to a window and opened the window, and of course probably just kept him there a night and a day or whatever, and then took him for a quick burial.
Right.
And that was even after embalming.
Mm-hmm.
That would have been like in the 20s,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah, they did. And like this casket here, this coffin, that viewing board on top is designed, they put dry ice in there because the embalming process wasn't that great. So they would keep the ice and keep that port closed, and the people would come up and look at them and slide it back closed to keep it cooler in there. I had a gentleman about 2 years ago, his sons called me. He'd passed away at home, and they called and wanted me to come down there, and they said, well, Dad's gone. I'm like, I'm sorry. I get there, hospice is there. They've already signed it off on the death certificate, pronounced him dead. They said, go ahead and get him ready. I said, we're gonna take him and bury him. I'm like, okay. So I actually got him prepared at home, shaved him and put his clothes on. And then I said, well, we need to go get a casket. They said, oh, we have one. So in the garage, he had made his own casket. So we dressed him, placed him in the casket, and I said, well, we have to get the grave up. He said, oh, we've got it done. So he was actually buried within just a few hours of his death. So it's kind of like the old school way.
You embalmed him there at home?
No, sir. All I did was I just dressed him and said and closed his mouth and shaved him, just like called other preparation, basically.
So you didn't get embalmed?
No, you don't have to be embalmed. It's not a requirement. If you're going to be up more than 48 hours, or if you have to, if you have some communicable disease or something that could potentially be a hazard to the community, then you need to be embalmed. But otherwise, no.
Interesting.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you be buried like in a pine box?
Absolutely.
Homemade? There's no, you
No,
can do that?
No. You know, a lot of people now are doing what they call green burials, and that's getting to be popular. There's actually, in the larger cemeteries, they're starting to have a section that's for green burials only. And it can be anything from a wicker basket to just a basic winding cloth. There's nothing that says you have to be in a casket or be embalmed.
Is that on a state-by-state basis, or is that pretty much
That's pretty well
national?
in the whole United States. I don't know, and as long as it doesn't affect the water table. So obviously, that's if there's a spring or something below where you want to be buried, you've got to look into that.
You're saying you don't need a boat?
No, ma'am. I have Sunset Memorial Park up here, and they do require an outer container or a vault because there's a lot of heavy equipment goes through there. But in the probably 50% of the time, we don't use a vault or an outer container. It's strictly what the family wants.
Can you be buried on private property?
You can.
And is that a Tennessee law, or do other states prevent?
We've done it. I'm licensed in Virginia, Tennessee, North Carolina. We've done it in all 3 states.
What are the rules, like it can't be,
So many feet to the house?
many feet from a lake?
No, we've
or
put people
water?
in their flower gardens before. Really. As long as it doesn't affect the water table, like the drinking water or anything, there's no problem. But once if you have someone in your family that you bury beside your house, it becomes a cemetery, and there's a public right-of-way through there. So, yeah.
Interesting.
Is it a disclosure item on a real estate sale?
I would.
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, what have
But,
we found here?
Yeah, we had this gentleman brought me a urn here a while back, and he said, we just bought this house and we found this in the closet. And I'm like, okay. So we had to open it up and find out who it was. It was someone from New Hampshire.
Wow.
And we got them back to their family.
Was they looking for
No, but they wasn't looking for him.
him?
I think it was the case where yes, sir.
At Shady Valley yesterday, the was Friday night silent auction. There was an urn. I was making fuss. Look, Uncle Wilbur. It was $1 and it didn't sell.
Was it full? I went to a yard sale one time, and there was an urn sitting there on the table. I asked the lady, I said, ma'am, do you know what that is? She said, that's a cookie jar. And I said, no, ma'am. She said, what is it? I said, it's an urn. She said, no, it's not. I said, it's an urn. So I went over there and opened it up. She said, get that out of here. It didn't have anybody in it, but it was an urn. So
What are the basic shapes for those?
for the urns,
Yeah.
most of them are like the round shapes. We have different ones. We have square ones. They're wooden or metallic. They can be bronze or whatever. You can get one that holds 2 people. So lots of different ones. But the internet now, you can go on the internet and get your own urn and just bring them to the funeral home, and they'll
So if
take care
somebody
of it.
came in with a cookie jar, you could use that for an urn?
I've used Tabasco pots before.
Tabasco pots.
This guy loved making Tabasco sauce, so his wife brought me his Tabasco pot.
But they're in a plastic bag, it's not like you're dumping the
No,
ashes in
yeah.
a, yeah.
Yeah, and then we sealed it. So
Yeah.
So you
Just
could
to
use
be
a
sure.
garbage bag in
Mhm.
your Tabasco pot.
yeah. We've got special
Yeah.
plastics that we use. Now I have put people in moonshine jars, number 13 moonshine jars.
There you go.
So yeah, people bring
My
different
husband
stuff.
likes pickles, so if you find somebody in a pickle jar, one day it might be him.
Yeah, there you go.
Wow.
So does the formaldehyde absorb before the body decomposes, or is this formaldehyde all over the cemetery?
Actually, it probably stays there for quite some time. We've taken people up we took some up from the Civil War when I was at Mortuary College in Atlanta, and they were still intact, and they were embalmed with arsenic.
The bodies were intact
Yep,
from the
it
Civil
was really
War?
cool. Morticians are kind of weird, so we looked. But I was like, wow. So I called the dean of the school, and he said, y'all didn't open it. And I'm like, yes, sir. So he called the family. The family came down and had pictures made with that gentleman.
Oh, really?
That's
Mhm.
amazing.
That's how good that they embalmed him. So
That's amazing.
it's got a lot of extrinsic factors depending on the soil and what type of container they're in and everything.
Interesting.
What are the rules for cremation? Where can you put people after they've been cremated? Can you just put them anywhere?
Hmm. Yeah.
You don't have to have any,
Supposedly you can't scatter them at the lake, which I know's probably happened, but a lot of people want to go to the ocean with them or different places. But you can scatter them on their land or whatever. Once you're cremated, it's not considered a human body anymore. It's just a cremains.
Cremains.
Hmm. Yeah, they can take them on a plane. But the only thing, if we send someone from here to Georgia, and through the mail, that we have to get them insured and somebody has to sign for them.
My uncle passed away, I think it's been 3 years ago, and they couldn't get his body from Connecticut, which is where he passed,
Mhm.
to California.
Right.
It was like a big thing. And the kids, of course, were all in California.
Hmm.
And they had a terrible time just trying to get his ashes over there.
Oh yeah.
It was crazy.
The Postal Service has really stepped up their game as far as helping get the cremains there fast. So
What about aquamation in Tennessee? Is that becoming more common
it's just
here?
now we're starting to hear about it and starting to learn about it. But I think it probably will be a thing. You know, Johnson County is in the surrounding area is one of the, like when I was in mortuary school, maybe 3% of the people were cremated here. Now it's probably up to 25 or 26. So, you know, this is the Bible Belt. A lot of people don't want to talk about cremation
Superstitions.
yeah. They don't. Yeah. But aquamation will be a thing of the future.
Now, what is that? I've never heard of that.
You basically melt the person.
Melt them?
And
Okay.
use the remains
You go ahead.
for farming,
For real?
for
Yeah.
real.
Melt? How do you melt them?
It's an acid solution.
Okay, so do you go in the oven or what happens?
No, you just go in a vat of an acid solution and it melts your body
So
seriously.
they just put your body into the thing?
Yeah, and it's a giant vat basically.
So then you gotta neutralize the liquid, or does it become neutral after?
There's some compounds out in there that allow the body to they get that out, but then I don't know what they do with the.
Do they
If
use
it's
the
a strong
urine?
enough acid to do that, then it's strong acid, so then you gotta neutralize it before you can spread it on crops. I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah,
you're
for-
killing the crops, so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for pets, they use it for crops, but do they use human remains for crops as well?
I haven't
Wasn't
heard that
sure.
part. No.
I know for pets they do.
I
'Cause
think
we had our dog
they
done.
maybe dry. It's like cremation
Yeah.
basically, but instead of going into the furnace, you know, some people have a fear of fire or flame, and so it's just a different way to do a cremation.
I didn't know you could do that. Do you do that?
No, ma'am.
You don't? Okay.
That'd be a whole different class of equipment and a whole,
Yeah.
I mean, that's strong acid. in
That's a-
It's a
large
big
quantities of
operation.
it, so
Mhm. That's a good question about what they do with the acids after they do the aquamation. Though.
Wow.
In what
Dan,
era?
didn't you do a funeral slab down there in Doe Valley up there that was in more or less in the backyard?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I was supposed that was,
Yeah.
they was talking about having them close to the house. That was probably 50, 60 yards from the house.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Do any of y'all remember hearing about in the mid '80s the guy that had his funeral before he died? I think he was from Shady Valley.
That was Shady Valley.
I was in school in Atlanta, and on the front page of the Atlanta Journal was this guy, and I'm like, that's from home. I'm famous. But it was kind of different. He laid in his casket and had his service, so he wanted to see who all was going to come. So he lived for quite some time after that.
He built his own casket.
Yes, ma'am, he
built
did.
his own casket.
He used it for a coffee table.
He used it as a coffee table?
Yes,
He had all female pallbearers,
yes.
and it was at midnight.
You remember?
Halloween night?
No, it wasn't Halloween.
Oh, that's too funny.
Yeah, what was your?
Cooling board, can you tell us about that? What era and how?
That was in the 1820s, 1840s era. They would take that to the home when the embalming was in its infancy, and you know, you go through what they call postmortem caloricity after you die. It's like cutting the car off. When you cut the car off, it gets warmer and hotter before it cools off. So your body does the same thing, and that would help with the cooling process of the body, so they could get everything they needed to get done.
So who's they that would take it?
The undertakers, or they probably, like with the ladies, they would get the ladies to come and help them after, you know, get them ready and put a sheet over them, let them cool, and then let the ladies dress the folks.
If you've ever been to New Orleans, you need to go to a cemetery.
Yeah.
That
Well-
is the most interesting thing, how they bury people in New
Yeah.
Orleans.
Lafayette
And
13.
We kept seeing these little bells on the outside of these big tombs or mausoleums type
Mhm.
things. And so the tour guide said what they would do is when they buried somebody or put them in the big tombs,
Mhm.
we're talking big above ground things, that they would tie a string to their finger and run it to the bell, so if they happened to wake up and they weren't dead, they could ring the bell.
Oh yeah, some of the larger cemeteries here around had it's called the Watchman,
Yeah.
and they would sit up all night and listen for the bells if they had a new client there, making sure that bell didn't get rung.
I'm awake, I'm awake.
Yeah, ding ding. Well, my question was, how would you find the string to, you know?
Just keep
Yeah, I
pulling.
would.
I'd break my string probably. Oh no. But that was really a cool thing.
Well, I guess that's why they started having the wakes
Yeah.
set up on.
And you know, somebody mentioned about if you had to be embalmed. They've actually opened caskets before and found scratch marks inside the caskets where the person had woke up and you know, wasn't dead. So I want to be embalmed.
Yeah.
Make sure I'm gone.
Wow.
Anybody else have any questions?
You're not gonna embalm one of us, are you?
No. No.
Any volunteers?
Yeah.
Today,
We
you
wanna,
said.
yeah.
Okay. Jeff, why don't you share your story with them about whenever you had those people there at school? I thought that's so cool.
Whenever I was in college at Emory and Henry, they had liberal arts courses that everybody was required to take. And you could go in and select. Well, I was a little slow, so I didn't get the opportunity to select the class I wanted. So I wound up taking a class called On Death and Dying. And whenever I got in the class, there was 24 of us in the class. There was only 4 of us had ever been to a funeral home or witnessed a funeral. And part of our curriculum was we got to make a field trip to Ferris Funeral Home in Abbey. And we went down there and went into the embalming room, and Mike Ferris was explaining everything, the process to us in the embalming room, and 2 of the football players blacked out. They had a little woman who was probably 85, I can't remember, in the visitation room, and they allowed us to go through there and pay our respects. And the young lady that was in front of me reached over and touched the little woman's cold hand and passed out. I caught her before she hit the floor, but I was shocked in that all of those, most of them were from Northern Virginia that had come down to Emory to college, but only 4 out of 24 had even been in a funeral home. It was just amazing.
Oh, yeah. When we go ahead, Dave.
I said, interesting.
Yeah. Whenever my class started out with 147 in the class there at Gupton Jones in Atlanta, we went to Lovejoy Morgue and there was 25 quit the first day. So they had never been in funeral service, never been in a funeral home. They just thought it was cool to ride around in those hearses. So they went bye-bye really fast. You have to want to serve the public to be in funeral service. I just feel like that's an imperative.
How did you get started?
I was hanging out with Charlie Hucks, and he was actually the coroner at the time. And I went with him on a call where someone had passed away, and just got fascinated with us and started hanging out. And he's like, if you're going to bury around here, I'm going to put you to work. So that was when I was a senior in high school, and I just never left.
Are you local here?
I am.
You are?
I'm from Forge Creek.
With Scotch-Irish, the German, Native American, all of the different cultures that make up our community, any stories on some of the unusual requests or burial customs over the years that you've heard about?
Well, we have started getting people from Laos, the Laotians.
Yeah.
And they're at about 30 of them at Sunset up here. They bury the body backwards. You know, we're traditionally facing the east. They face the west. That mountain right here, they absolutely love that mountain, and they worship that mountain. So a lot of times they will undress them. Everybody forms a circle around and then put a dress robe on them. But that's different. Then I had a gypsy funeral when I was in Atlanta one time. That was different for sure.
A lot of tambourines involved?
Yeah. They went in and they told the funeral director, they said, we will pay for the damages now.
Sounds like a Greek wedding.
They dug a pit in his yard and had a pig roast in his yard. I thought he was going to have a stroke. So that was his first and last gypsy funeral.
You
But
mentioned something about facing them east, or that's normal, like everybody gets buried that way?
Normally, yes. We do have a few cemeteries that, like Pleasant Grove, that it kind of goes around in a circle. So I'm not sure there, but normally you're facing the east when you rise, you know, after the...
The Moravians were really big on that. It's because of the resurrection.
Yeah, Orthodox Jews, that they want the blood to remain with the body. So if you embalm them, you have to capture the blood and place it in the casket with them.
Do they still dig up the bones after so long and rebury them, or is that custom changed?
That's changed. I think Germany's about the only place that they
Still does that.
You just rent that spot for so many years, and they take you up and put you under a church.
What's the different roles in the funeral home? Is a coroner actually works for the county, or does it work for the funeral home?
No, they work for the county.
Okay.
And then we have the medical examiner's office now, which is in Johnson City. That's for like Carter, Johnson, Sullivan counties. So they're quite busy.
Okay.
If there's an unattended death, they have to go to Johnson City, usually for an autopsy. Sometimes if the person's been really sick, they won't make them get an autopsy though.
When I was a kid, I had a friend's brother who'd been sickly, and when he passed away, they had to put a glass across his casket. Do you know why that would be?
Put a glass across it?
Caused the disease, probably.
I didn't know if he had I don't remember if he had a contagious disease or what, but that's the only way they could view him, by putting a glass across.
This is a protective barrier, I would imagine. And something else I had just thought of, the undertakers back in the day, you know how they would check to see if you were dead? They'd place a mirror. Yep. That was kind of bad.
It worked.
It did.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
When they did the post-mortem pictures of, like especially children and stuff, put the family all together and have them there, was that done in conjunction with the funeral home, or how did you get somebody to do that?
Normally not. I hadn't been at the funeral home but about 5 or 6 years, and we had the tradition of taking him home. We took this gentleman to his home, and he looked really good, you know. So Charlie said, well, we'll just leave him here tonight with you guys if that's okay. And they're like, yeah. I said, you need us to stay? And he's like, no, we're good. Well, the next day we go to get him to go for the burial. He's all disheveled. His clothes are all wrinkled, and I'm like, what happened? Did the casket turn over? And the lady's like, no, said, we hadn't had no family pictures taken for a long time, so we took him out of the casket and had pictures made.
No.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, I thought Charlie was gonna have a stroke.
They need him in the casket.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, they had set him up in a chair, evidently had those Instamatic cameras, and took family pictures. I didn't see him, I didn't want to.
I suppose you can, as a professional, you can't say anything, but you guys ever see ghosts or spirits or have any weird things that happen?
Just little nuances of I think people send you a sign that they are okay. I really do. You know, you'll see a red bird when they're not supposed to be here, or a butterfly when in the dead of winter. Sometimes it's just weird, but yeah, you do see stuff.
Yeah.
I've seen some.
Yeah.
In a cemetery. We were visiting my husband's mother up in New York.
Mm-hmm.
The sun was going down, and it was on this huge hill, and there was a drive. We pulled in, and we both looked up the hill, and there was a man pushing a woman in a wooden wheelchair. And they looked right at us, and I looked at my husband, and we turned around and said a prayer for his mama, turned around and looked at the hill, and they were gone. And I said, I'm sorry, did you just see that?
Yeah.
He goes, did you? I said, can we go? Can we go now?
Yeah.
That was pretty weird.
Yeah. But I think a lot of times they're telling us they're okay.
Mm-hmm.
They've moved on.
Might have been her and we didn't know
It
it.
could have been.
One lady was going to the airport, and so she had her daddy's ashes in a cookie tin, and they said, and when she went through, they said, "What's in that?" Says, "You'll be surprised. That's my dad's ashes."
Oh my goodness.
As long as they didn't open them looking for cookies, right?
Yeah, that's right.
What's that wooden box with the handle?
That's actually some restorative art stuff that we
It's a
did.
ghost.
Yeah, there we go. This was Charlie Hux's, and we all had to do one of these when we were in school. And you take a skull and you create with wax you create a head. And I hate because it's gone back apart, but you have to, for a grade, you have to do one of those. So they're just really cool. I use pencil erasers and to make my depth, and so that worked pretty well. You know, you've got on your face your 5 eyes wide at your zygomatic arches. Your nose is 1 eye wide. You got thirds of your face so if you don't have a lot to work with, if you just got a little bit, you can restore that person in a lot of time. Anyone else? I guess that's all I have then. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Dan. We certainly do appreciate that. My grandmother told me stories, and she was one of the ladies in the community that they would call if there was a death. And she had a little basket, and it had stuff in it, and she would take her basket and go, and they would dress the ladies. You washed them. They'd take a cloth and wash them and clean them up, and then dress them and lay them out on the bed. And she also delivered babies, but I won't talk about it. So she was helping people come in and go out both. But thanks to Dan for coming and being with us today. We hope that you enjoyed it, and you'll come back next month. We'll have Stephen Long And probably there's going to be some music involved in that one. So come back and see us next month. We have refreshments and drinks in the back. I think there's some malt cider back there to commemorate these beautiful fall days that we're having. So visit and have some refreshments. And if you're a member, make sure you stay for the meeting afterwards.